Welcome, welcome to today's webinar. Glad to have everybody here with Betsy and I as we unpack these new Title IX regulations that hit 1 week ago today. I'm going to start off semi-slow to make sure we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds registered for today's webinar. We want to make sure those who are participating live are able to get in as the webinar starts. But we are really excited to have you here. Appreciate you taking the time to listen in. And as I'll say a couple more times today, this will be recorded and you will receive the recording in an email about 24 hours after the webinar ends. So as you're joining us, the chat bar is open and available to attendees. Please put in the chat bar your name, where you are from, what institution, your location, say hello to your colleagues, say hello to us. We would love to hear from you. Our last webinar for K-12 was a very active webinar, and then we're jumping right in with you all, but we love to just see everyone's names, both who are clients of ours, but also who are new to ICS. So we're going to keep on trucking. Just know you will get the recording of this webinar after, and we'll just keep going, Bets. So we're starting on this journey to implementation of the regs by August 1st. And I first want to just tell you a little bit about myself, our team, and our company, because we do have so many new people joining us today. We have smashed some records in our registrations for a free webinar, which has been really exciting for us. So my name's Courtney Bullard. I'm the founder and CEO of Institutional Compliance Solutions. I'm joined today by Betsy Smith, who's Director of Title IX Services. I don't think you can see her until she starts speaking, but she's out there, and she will be handling really the meat and potatoes, as we like to say here in the South, of today's webinar. But I want to just tell you a little bit about our team and what we do. So I founded ICS 8 years ago. It is a mission-based company, and our mission is pretty simple, and it is to provide care and support to our clients and community partners as they effectuate their compliance efforts with Title IX and related laws and regulations. And we do that in a lot of different ways. These are all of our specialists on our team. When we first started, it was just me. I have had the privilege of growing the company to this great group, as well as some others who are on this slide, our operations and client development, who do a fantastic job of serving our clients and community partners each day. But our specialists, one of the main ways that we serve our mission really is through free webinars such as this, our free law and education podcast. So if you've never tuned in, I would encourage you to do so. Trainings, which we'll talk a lot more about as we go through the webinar today, and then serving in external and interim roles. So everyone that's a specialist on our team serves as external investigators, decision makers, informal resolution facilitators, advisors, et cetera, for institutions, colleges and universities, but also, most important for purposes of today, a lot of our team members serve as interim Title IX coordinators. So when we had our huddle as a team on Monday, post the release of the regulations last Friday, we talked a lot about not only how to support our clients and community partners going forward and learn these regulations, but also what this looks like on the ground as interim coordinators and implementing all of this, or this journey to implementation, as we like to say, through this webinar. And so Betsy Smith serves as an interim coordinator who's going to be presenting to you. And you will see that really our signature and the difference for us in the way that we approach the work is we try to take the legalese and the complicated and make it as digestible as possible, and to give you sort of high-level roadmaps, checklists, flowcharts to follow in doing this work going forward. So you'll see we've kind of designed the webinar that way today. We will cite to a few of the specifics in the regulations and in the preamble, but you're not going to see a lot of that today. What we want to give you is some high-level themes to help you figure out your quick start in getting going on this journey that we're going to be on until August 1st. I see the chat bar is blowing up, which we'd love to see. I just want to tell you it is open if you've just joined us and want to say hello to your colleagues or our team members. We'd love to hear from you. We had a Clery Act webinar on Wednesday that Lindsay did on our team. We had folks all the way from Alaska. So it's always just interesting to see where everyone's from. And for our higher ed friends here today, if you were not able to attend and you want that recording, please let us know. So a full few disclaimers as we get started. The first, Betsy and I and many of our specialists are practicing attorneys, but this webinar is not legal advice, does not establish an attorney-client relationship. If you have state law specific questions and we are not your legal counsel, you will always hear us refer you to legal counsel, and we work very closely with counsel on the ground at institutions and colleges and universities. So always have to give that quick disclaimer. The materials for today's webinar, 1 hour after the webinar, 24 hours after the webinar ends, you're going to receive an email from us that has the recording link, and it also has a Google Drive link with the slides. They will be labeled as slides in that Google Drive, but also all of the resources that the Department of Education put out will be in that Google Drive link for you, as well as any Q&A that comes in during the webinar that I'll be managing while Betsy's speaking. So you will get all of that 24 hours after the webinar. And also note, again, you can ask questions in the Q&A, as well as put some things in the chat bar, and I will do my best to answer anything we're ready to answer today, knowing that we have a ton of training coming up to get you in compliance with these new regulations. So it will not be as deep of a dive, but we answered a lot of questions in the last webinar for K-12. And if you're a higher ed institution that has K-12 on your campus and you want a recording of the K-12 webinar, we're happy to provide that to you as well. Lastly, this is an overview. So Betsy has been hard at work digesting this really beefy document that is very lengthy since last Friday, as have I and other team members, but it is still an overview, much to come, much to learn. We are not going to be touching on everything there is to touch on that is contained in these new regulations. Quickly, our plan today, I'm going to go over briefly how we got here and top 5 things to do to get you going and what you need to get done by implementation deadline of August 1st. I'm going to turn it over to Betsy, who's going to break down the new regulations with 8 themes, and then we will conclude. And if we have time to answer any questions out loud, we will do that. Otherwise, you will get the chat bar questions after the recording comes out. Few reminders before we dig into the substantive content, and this is really important to me as the leader of my team and as we support our clients and community partners. So next month is Mental Health Awareness Month. So this is especially on my mind as I was thinking through that this morning. These new regulations are coming at a time when everyone is extremely busy. There is so much happening on college campuses. And of course, you're winding down the academic school year. There's never a good time, but we know you have a lot on your plate. So we want you to just pause and take a deep breath. We know there have been tons of webinars this week, which is incredible. That means a lot of free resources out there for you. But we also know that sometimes that can be paralyzing. It's almost like information overload. And I talk about that in my most recent podcast episode. So just know, no one has all the answers right now. There is no smoking gun that is going to tell you exactly what to do or how to do it. We have lived these 2020 regulations for 4 years. So best practices are going to develop over time. We're going to learn more over time. And there is not a single organization out there that is going to be able to tell you 100% what to do and how to do it. We're going to just give you our professional, from experience advice as we go through today in a digestible manner, the best we can. But no one has all those answers. I will also tell you, Betsy and I went through this back in 2020 together and supporting our clients and community partners. So it has been a little bit like getting the gang back together and living those days, except for then we were in the middle of a pandemic. But I would argue there's no substitute for experience. So Some of you are brand new to this role, and this is the first time you're going to be on this journey. And some of you have been on this journey before and probably have some very vivid memories of when this occurred in 2020 and everything in between. So just take a deep breath. We've got you here at ICS. We're here to give you the resources and guidance. And lastly, take the vacation. So we had an in-person, amazing civil rights investigator advanced training last week. And some participants who are saying, well, now that the regs have hit, I probably need to cancel that vacation. And I'm just going to encourage you, don't do that. Whether your vacation is a staycation, whatever this looks like this summer, it's going to get done. Take the vacation, take the time you need to take care of yourself through all of these changes. All right, so how did we get here? Just a quick reminder, there were two proposed regulations on the table. One is with respect to participation in athletics, and the other was to amend, broadly speaking, the 2020 regulations on sexual harassment, which dictate how institutions, universities are supposed to respond to what we used to call sexual harassment, and we do until August 1st under your education program or activity. We are focusing today on the new regulations that were released last Friday, implementation deadline of August 1st. The NPRM for athletics has been tabled for now. So that's our focus as we go through today. So one question is, what happens to the 2020 regulations? Or more importantly, for y'all on the ground, what procedures or processes are you supposed to be using for reports that come in from now until August 1st, but also we'll say reports, although the language is a little different in the new regs that come in after August 1st for conduct that occurred prior to August 1st. So as I've said already 100 times, the implementation date is August 1st for these 2024 regulations, and the 2020 regs apply between now and that August 4th implementation date. The preamble to the regulations on 1354 has a paragraph specifically about conduct that occurs prior to August 1st, but is reported after August 1st. So let's say you get information that comes to you on August 3rd, but it's conduct that occurred in July. What the preamble says is that you will apply the 2020 regulation procedures. That is a very high level summary. I encourage you to go read it. I don't think it's going to be as simple an application as what I'm saying here, but I did want to touch on it briefly because that is going to be a really big question. And for our community partners, you will still have access to all the 2020 information and resources and courses, plus all the revised on-demand courses for 2024. Very high level, what needs to be done by August 1st. So you're going to hear Betsy say, like, deep breath, and then we need you to get to work. And we've got a quick guide checklist that is available on our resources page. There's a QR code at the end of this webinar to that page as well. It is completely free, not behind any kind of email wall or anything like that, that it goes into this in a lot more detail and is an actual checklist for you. But you need to, one, update all your policies, procedures, and notices, and then disseminate and publish all of them. And then third, you're going to be reevaluating your Title IX team, identifying new team members, which Betsy will talk about, and or changing the composition of that team. Then four, you're going to get your team trained before they do the work and come up with an employee training plan. Betsy's going to go over one theme is training. This is a big lift for our Title IX coordinators on the ground because it is now required. And then fifth, now and through the end of this and beyond, you want to be communicating with your school community, including your stakeholders, on what resources you're going to need to help you as you go through this implementation journey and beyond, but also to your community on what is happening and what that looks like, which means a strong partnership with your communications team on the ground. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Betsy now, who's going to unpack the 1,561 pages of the preamble and the regs. The actual regs start on page 1505, and I will tell you on our resources page, we have just the regulations saved for you, plus the regulations, plus the preamble. And she's going to do that in 8 high-level themes that kind of dig into and unpack for you what's going on. And note, we have a suitcase on this page to continue with that theme of take the vacation. I saw somebody in the chat bar +1 what I'm saying. So if you're fortunate to have one planned, please go and do it. All right, Betsy.
Or maybe just plan it. Go ahead and just make that plan. All right. Hey, I'm Betsy. I'm excited to be with y'all today. I know a lot of you. I'm excited for those who we've never met or had with us before at ICS. I am really hopeful that what you take away from our training is a true understanding and digestible amount of information from this portion. So I think my goal for you is to just give you the pieces that I feel like you really need to know, the high level stuff in a way that's manageable and hopefully organized through these themes. So my first theme and my first big takeaway was the devil is in the details of these regulations. So what I say, or what I mean when I say that, is there are so many little nuanced details and changes in these regulations, or these 50 whatever pages at the end, that are very, very different. And the placement of the commas, the use of and or are exceptionally important. The language changes and the additions that exist are super important. We want to all be talking on the same page. So I'm going to throw information at you to make sure that we're all speaking the same language there, and making sure that when you're giving it a read, if you are, that you are looking for those commas, those details, etc. And I want to make sure that you know like how we've prepared and how we've thought about this, that we're going to talk with you today and break it down. And the first thing that I did is read the 50-ish pages. Here's my version right here. I read them 3 times before I touched that preamble, because I wanted to make sure that I understand what that said and then understanding the meanings on the back end. So really start at the end and work yourself backwards. But the big definition changes. So complainant is a big definition change. The word complainant has expanded, or the definition of the word complainant has expanded. And it's expanded to include students or employees who were participating or attempting to participate in the school's education or activity when the sex-based harassment or the sex discrimination occurred. Notice those are like sex-based harassment and sex discrimination are a little bit different than what we had in 2020 as well. We'll get there, but I just want you to remember now that a complainant could be somebody who has since left the institution or left the school, but was participating at the time of the event. All right, complaint. So this one for me, it's a little bit like, whoa, this could be a whole lot of tracking information and trying to figure out how something actually came in. But a complaint can now be oral or written. And what it has to include is a request to investigate, or where a reasonable person would assume that that's, or would understand that to be a request to investigate. And so that is different than the formal complaint that we had before. I think 1, it's going to require a lot of training, and 2, it's going to be really important for our coordinators to have a way to document those conversations that occur, and then perhaps follow up with email or some type of writing to show where the process started or where that complaint began, especially if it was oral. Pregnancy or related conditions is expanded like in a mind-blowing amount. We'll talk more about that, but there is a definite expansion in what is expected of our institutions when it comes to pregnant or parenting or pregnant or pregnancy-related conditions for our students and our employees. Relevant, if you know me and you've been through our trainings, one of the things that the 2020 regulations made me really angry about is that they didn't give us a definition of relevant. So I'm most excited about this definition, not because I think it's exceptionally amazing, but the fact that we have one and we're all working from the same playbook. So relevant means when it may aid in showing whether the alleged sex discrimination occurred. And that's like a summary of a much longer paragraph with commas and things. But that's the gist of it. And so what I want you to focus on is, hey, make sure we have that definition of relevancy and make sure that we are training on that definition, because that is something new that we haven't had before. So there are some additional definitions that the regulations use, first being student. And it sounds really dumb to think like there's a definition of student. Okay, how does that matter? I really want you to focus on this definition because most institutions have a definition of student for all other things. So federal financial aid, for registration, for what privileges and rights those or opportunities on campus those individuals receive. That definition might be different than student and what as it is in the Title IX regulation. So what I would encourage you to do is go find the definition of student elsewhere and see if you can make it match. See if you can take this definition that is required and make it match so that we're all talking about student in the same way with the same opportunities, same rights, same restrictions, etc. Student with a disability is defined. We'll talk more about that. Admission. So admission is defined, and we want to make sure that you are using that definition of admission and not necessarily one that your institution has historically used that is different. Applicant, so applicant for a position, applicant for employment, those types of things. It is important and it matters as to whether someone is participating in or attempting to participate in your education program or activity. Confidential employee, so that is super important in the higher ed space, and we need to make sure that your confidential employees know who they are as defined in the regulations, as well as what their responsibilities look like, because the responsibilities have expanded a bit for those individuals. And then supportive measures has a very specific definition as well. Finally, the thing that we don't have an agreed upon definition to is consent. So you may have the definition of consent that makes sense for your campus. There is discretion there. I'm saying that in kind of a want voice because that does allow for it to look different across states, across the country, even across institutions in the same community. So it does make it a bit more challenging, but what we want you to make sure that you're doing is have that definition of consent, make sure that everyone is trained on what that looks like and that it's something that's easy for your students to understand so that they know whether they're violating it or not. All right, so I told you about the commas, the semicolons, the colons, all of that. I'm going to reiterate it here. We have actually seen professionals who do this work every day already misstate the regulations because of the placement of commas. I know it's like, okay, you're really in the details and in the weeds here, Betsy. I am, because literally for big things, we have seen the regulations misstated, and we want to make sure that you get it right. We're going to lift that for you if you're a community partner with us, if you're training with us, if you're having a policy written by us, those types of things. But if you're taking that load on, I really want you to make sure that you are having a good review of the sentence that exists. It feels a bit like being back in law school for me, because that was always, some way that a professor would trick us up or something like that. In this case, it's just real life. Like, this is what we're working with, and we have to try to figure it out and make it plain as possible for our students, employees, and anyone else who's involved in our processes. Also, I want you to take a pause when reading lists that are in the regulations about whether there's an or an and at the end as it starts into the last of the list, because we often see either an or an and there, and that is critical with how much or how far you have to go, whether you must use all of those things or one of those things. So just make sure that you're having a look, or and. All right, the big language changes, and here at ICS, we like to get the language right. We want all of you to be speaking the same language as us. So we will talk about these things, and you'll hear me catch myself even today as I've spent a week in these regulations, 1 week, one solid week. I'm still mistaking some of the words and using them as they were before, but we're trying hard to make sure that we're correcting ourselves and having the conversations using these new terms or changed terms. So what we would historically have called a report of sexual harassment at ICS. So somebody tells you that they have been sexually harassed or somebody else has been experienced sex discrimination. That is now a notification. That is a notification to the Title IX coordinator. So if you're reading these regulations, think that that's the word that means what used to be report. Formal complaint now sounds less formal. There is no formal on the front of it. It is complaint. That actually does sound a lot more student friendly, and it's less formal because it doesn't have to be in writing, as we talked about earlier. Then formal grievance process that was under the 2020 regulations is referred to in its new ideation as grievance procedures. So your grievance procedures, that actually helps some institutions as they're writing policy because they have to pass a smaller policy but can have separate procedures that don't have to go through as much scrutiny with boards or legislature, et cetera. So it is a little bit helpful with the procedure language or words there, but that's how we'll be referring to it as grievance procedure. And then pregnancy, we've always talked about, or at least in my experience, we've always talked about pregnancy accommodation. So how are we going to accommodate someone who is pregnant or has a related condition? Under these regulations, those are called modifications. And that is separate and distinct from supportive measures that we see in other types of sex discrimination or sex-based harassment. So pregnancy accommodations, modifications. All right. So theme number 2, make room on your plate, Title IX coordinators. So as you're sitting here with us today, you're probably like, Betsy, my plate's full. What do you want me to do about that? And my answer is I want you to think about what can be moved from your plate to someone else, or what responsibilities you might have to give up, because these things that I'm going to talk about are going to be piled onto that plate. They're going to be added on to what is likely already overflowing. So coordinators, you do have heightened expectations under these regulations. So let's talk about some of them. Some of them I have additional slides on. Others, I'm just going to hit on a little bit briefly here. So the trainings are required now. So required trainings, and there is a certain subset of employees that are required to be trained that haven't been required to be trained before. There are certain expectations for some employees, but not other employees. And then there are also the confidential employees that have very separate and distinct expectations. These trainings also potentially apply or do apply to pregnancy and how someone responds when being informed that a student or even an employee might be pregnant. So we want for you to make sure that you are training, that you have a plan for training. And when a training is required, that means you better be able to show that it happened. And if the department comes in and says this person didn't report or didn't provide a notification, and you go back and say, well, they weren't trained, that's on us as an institution. So we need to make sure that we have a documenting system and that there is discipline and follow-up and potentially things taken away from them or their responsibilities removed if they are not completing the training as required. We have publication and dissemination of information, which I'll talk about. It is a bit overwhelming in the amount of places that your non-discrimination policy and statement need to be under these regulations. So we'll talk more about that. There is more conduct that is covered under the Title IX grievance procedure. So we have expanded scope. We have on the basis of sex as a definition now, which we'll talk about further. And then pregnancy and all of that is now covered in what's called sex discrimination. So more to come on that, more conduct being covered. What I will tell you here, though, is the department in the preamble says that should be a 10% increase, or they expect a 10% increase. This makes me giggle a little bit because when I look at the amount of information that we now have to send, we will have to send through grievance procedures, it is higher than 10% of the work. So I think higher than 10% more than the work that we're already doing. So it made me laugh. Apparently it's supported by data. I did not conduct the data. My data would probably say something different, but it doesn't really matter. All we can say is you need to prepare for more than 10%, in my opinion, of new cases falling under a grievance procedure that is formalized. You're going to have new team members and changing roles for some of your team members. So we're going to ask you to have a thought about that, and what your supervision or authority and responsibility over them looks like under these new regs. We're going to be initiating more complaints from the coordinator's perspective. So the evaluation for a coordinator to initiate complaints looks a little bit different. And it's our expectation that that number increases of complaints that are issued by the coordinator and not just requested by a complainant. And we're going to have some expectations around monitoring barriers. So just making sure that there any barriers that might exist to reporting are being addressed. And finally, increased record keeping, which is always our favorite, right? How to make sure that those records are up to date. I'm being sarcastic there because that is a really hard part to do. And it is the part that OCR will come in and ask us about. So we need to make sure that we're doing it well. All right, so let's start with taking some things off your plate or moving your plate around a little bit. For your team, I want you to think there has to be one coordinator. So I've seen institutions previously who say we have a coordinator for, let's say, students, and we have a coordinator for employees. Cool, but one of those has to be the most important. One of those has to have the responsibility, right? It's totally fine if that's what you have, but you need to have one person who is the ultimate authority. And I want you to remember that. And so they're not equals, right? Those people cannot be equals, or we have two coordinators. That's not a thing. You can have a coordinator and you can have designees, but you have to have one who is in charge, and all of that responsibility sits with based on these regulations. All right, so we're going to talk through some of the phases now and who's going to serve in those roles. And I want you as the coordinators to be thinking about, hey, who's going to serve in each role? And we'll talk about some of the overlap. So first we have evaluation. And here at ICS, we've always called this triage. So you're triaging a case. You're getting a case in, you're looking at it. Hey, where does this fit? Is it Title IX? Is it something else? Is it something that the coordinator needs to sign or initiate under these regulations? That is called evaluation under these regs. And so we're going to be tweaking some of our language. We may not get rid of triage because we sure do love that, but it might be evaluation and triage as well. Certainly evaluation, okay? So we want you to think, who is going to do that evaluation? Who is going to make the decision to say Title IX, not Title IX? And for you all, it's going to be which door is it going to go behind? More to come on the doors. But which procedure are we going to use? Then you have someone who's facilitating those supportive measures for your complainant on the front end, respondent after they receive notification. Who's doing that? Is that the coordinator? Is it a designee? Is it a designee that's reporting the information to the coordinator? It can be the coordinator, but it doesn't have to be. It can be a designee. So we just need to make sure that the coordinator has responsibility over that as a whole, not necessarily doing each item in the weeds. Investigation. So this is a change in these regulations. Our investigator and our decision maker in some pieces can be the same, right? Like we can have a single investigator model, but, okay, hear me say, ... It's not my favorite, and I don't necessarily recommend it. So we want you to think about what works best for your school. Some states have requirements within their state or within their circuit that they can't do that they must have separate. It's really going to depend. It's going to be an institution-based decision. And we want you to think about where the bias and conflict of interest can exist based on that single investigator model and really be thoughtful about it. Your investigator can be your decision maker. Your investigator can be your decision maker. Again, you think about that. Your Title IX coordinator can also be an investigator. Again, that was something that we had under the 2020 regs as well, and we didn't necessarily recommend that. There are lots of challenges around serving as both. The main one, in my opinion, is actually the supportive measures piece, in that the person who is really over the supportive measures, we definitely don't want them to be doing the investigations, because it makes it harder to ask for something that you need if the person who's questioning you with all these hard questions is the same person that you're going to have to go to and ask. So there's some challenges on either one of those. You're going to have to make some institutional decisions, and anyone that we're drafting policy for, we're going to help you with those and how to write that into policy, et cetera. And anyone that we're training, we're gonna talk through how to make sure that that works. And let's see, I'm gonna tell you this. I didn't even tell our K-12s, but I meant to. If you'll notice, decision making is one word here, because decision maker, that word is one word in the regulations, which is mind blowing to me. And I can only imagine that in the 372 times, yes, I checked, 372 times that the word decision maker is used, they cut out 372 spaces, or maybe a half a page or so, from the regulation. So we were able to do that by smushing the word decision maker together to make a non-word, but it is now a word in the Title IX space. All right, continuing on. You have to allow appeals. We'll talk more about appeals, but there's some nuances depending on which door we're going to go behind as we move forward. We'll get there. Informal resolution, you get to allow it. It does need to have a notice of allegations. I have another slide about that later, but it does need to still have a notice of allegations before you initiate an informal resolution. So more to come there. As a reminder though, under these regulations, the investigator cannot serve as an informal resolution facilitator. And then we have supportive measures review administrator. This is a new human in your process. So this is an add-on, a bonus, somebody else you get to train. They are a neutral individual who is going to determine if somebody challenges or asks for a review of a decision that our coordinator or whomever's in charge of initiating supportive measures, a decision that they might make can be challenged to an SMRA, as we're calling them, to determine whether that was the right decision or the wrong decision based on the definition of supportive measures under the regulations. We're going to have a separate training for them. Biggest recommendation here as you're thinking about who's going to serve in that role is make sure it's not someone who reports to the Title IX coordinator, because that's going to be a conflict of interest pretty obviously. And then we also have those pregnancy and related condition support and modifications. You likely already have somebody on your campus who is doing this, who is serving in this role. So you need to think about, is it going to stay there and I'm going to oversee it as a coordinator? And we're going to make sure that they're trained up on what those expectations are? Is it going to come all the way to me? What does that look like? Who's going to do the training? And how are we going to make sure that it's accurate? I'm trying to change the screen. Sorry, y'all, I had to get a drink. All right. So we want you to make decisions. So don't freeze. Take your vacation. Don't freeze. Do both. And make some hard decisions right now as you're thinking about what it's going to look like for you in the future. So one, grievance procedures, remembering that you can always provide extra due process. So we're going to give you what's required for certain pieces, but remembering that you can always provide extra. So if it makes sense for you as we go through all this to say, you know what, everything's going through the same thing, we're doing it all the same way, then that's what you do. But you have to make those decisions as an institution and be prepared to write that into policy and explain your decision. More to come on what I mean by those doors. Title IX team makeup. So we already talked a bit about that, but think about your people who are the best served to be in those in the roles that we've already talked about, and then connect this policy with any other policies that you might already have. All right, so the what and the where is expanded. So jurisdiction has broadened, and or application, that's what the regulations will call it, and scope has expanded. So in 4, I had to check how many there were. 4 areas. Number 1, we have sex discrimination definition, which I'll talk about, but that is expanded from what we have seen previously, and also what has to use a grievance procedure. Sex-based harassment, which if you work with us previously and in moving forward, we always talk about as bucket 2. You'll see more on that in a moment. On the basis of sex, we now have a definition for on the basis of sex, but don't go to the definition section to look for it. It's actually in a different location. I think I have it on a different slide. But it is hidden a little bit. And then education program or activity has been expanded. So I want you to think about this big full circle of sex discrimination. Everything in this big circle needs to go through a specific grievance procedure. This is not something that we had under the 2020 regs. Under the 2020 regs, the only behavior that had to go under a grievance procedure or process was sexual harassment. Now it is any sex discrimination. Also, that includes sex-based harassment. Sex-based harassment is the 3 buckets that formerly we called sexual harassment, plus a little bit of expansion on those. Okay, so big circle, sex discrimination, must use process. Small slice of the pie, sex-based harassment, has a separate required process with more due process as we will talk about it. Gosh, higher ed, this is hard. This is like hard stuff to figure out what goes where and what process, etc. So just understand that we're trying to put it in as easy terms as possible, but mandatory reporting requirements also now apply to everything in that whole circle, not just the slice of pie. All right, sex-based harassment. So as you know, bucket 1, if you've worked with us, bucket 1 is quid pro quo. Under these regulations, bucket 1 doesn't change. Okay, bucket 1 stays the same. It uses a process. We'll talk about the process, but the definition in bucket 1 is same or exceptionally similar. Bucket 2 expands greatly. More to come, but bucket 2 expands greatly. It is hostile environment, sexual harassment or hostile environment harassment as it's used in the regulations. And we used to call it severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive. So just pulling your mind back to how we at ICS had always referred to bucket 2, it is hostile environment harassment now. And then bucket 3 is those specific offenses. I left it small because there's only like teeny minor changes in the definition of dating violence. So have a look there, but they got rid of the word violent in front of crimes. Otherwise, we are the same in bucket 3. So, and for those who don't know bucket 3 and you're like, what the heck are you talking about, crazy person? Bucket 3 includes sexual assault, dating violence, domestic violence, and stalking. And included in that definition of sexual assault is rape, fondling, statutory rape, and incest. It's a mouthful, but we got it out. All right. So bucket 2 specifically, I'm going to spend some time here with you. And the hostile environment harassment includes 5 elements, or they've listed them as 5 elements in the regulations and in the preamble. So it has to be a behavior that is unwelcome, sex-based conduct or on the basis of sex, which I'll explain more on the next slide, subjectively and objectively offensive. So it's offensive to me as the complainant. It's also offensive to a reasonable person or would be offensive to a reasonable person. So that's an and. Severe or pervasive. Severe or pervasive. Hear me say that or. It's really important because this is a big expansion on what behaviors can come into this specific grievance procedure for bucket 2. Okay, the big deal that we have an or there, because historically, if we would say, hey, that only happened one time, it wasn't pervasive, right? Now those one-time things might be bucket 2. All right, and it limits or denies access. So a party's access, a complainant's access to their education. And we have these 5 factors that help us determine, does this fit into hostile environment harassment? 1 is the degree to which conduct affects access. 2 is the type, frequency, and duration of conduct. 3 is ages, roles, previous interactions, or other factors about each party. These are my favorites when the department adds in just other factors. You just decide what other factors those might be, but that's pretty broad. Okay, but we can consider other factors. They don't tell us what other factors, even when we go and read that preamble, they're like, oh, whatever it might be. that you think you should consider. And then location of the conduct and context at which it occurred. And finally, number 5, which is the most broad of all of them, other sex-based harassment. Now, what that doesn't mean, and we know from the preamble that it doesn't mean, is sex-based harassment against another person and prior to this situation. Okay, not related to this situation or the situation at hand. And I did see a comment that said bucket 3 is VAWA crimes. That's right, but also there are changes in the definitions of the VAWA crime. So I want to be very specific that we can't just go pull from VAWA anymore because of that dating violence change. So I'm just going to put that out there to make sure that we're clear on that. I don't want anybody to get confused by going and just pulling VAWA. All right, so on the basis of sex, and this is the biggest, like controversial or like divisive piece of these regulations. So all of our states are responding to this differently based on who their leadership is, the leadership of their school boards, the leadership of their superintendents, and our K-12s, and then the leadership of the institutions and the legislatures at our higher ed institutions. So this is, look, it is what it is. You have to talk with your council about how this applies for your institution. But what we want you to know is that on the basis of sex, yay, I even put it in there, page 1522. I told you it wasn't in the regular definitions portion, but it's defined on page 1522. And it means sex stereotypes, sex characteristics, pregnancy or related conditions, sexual orientation, and gender identity. And I do think at most higher ed institutions, actually, this is more accepted than it is in our K-12 space, where we're seeing a whole lot of stuff blow up around this. But I do think it's going to impact institutions, especially our private institutions. And you are still going to be able to have your exceptions or exemptions to the regulation. So just make sure that you are talking with your council and looking into that as well. All right. Yeah, and I did say exceptions and it is exemptions. However, in the regulations, they say exceptions and exemptions, which is kind of strange to me. But here we are. We're learning new language as we go together. All right. A quick note. So the big places that you need to be thinking about how this applies, and that on the basis of sex, the preamble talks a whole lot about locker rooms and bathrooms. And what it says is that you have that adopting a policy or engaging in a practice that prevents a person from participating in an education program or activity consistent with the person's gender identity subjects that person to more than de minimis harm, which would mean there is a violation of Title IX. Okay, or of the Title IX section. So just highlight there, big area, bathrooms, locker rooms, which have already been addressed, or which have already been addressed in a lot of your states separately. So education program or activity, this is that application, and it's on page 1522 as well. Title IX applies to behavior occurring within the education program activity in the U.S. ... There's some caveats to that as we continue through. It includes property owned or controlled by a student organization who is officially recognized by the institution. That was in old regulations. But new, conduct that is subject to a school's disciplinary authority. So this is big. This actually expands what should be considered Title IX by a lot, because we want to think about what your codes of conduct or employee conduct cover outside of their school or employment. And if it is if you are considering behavior outside of that specific on-campus or in academic programs for discipline, and you could discipline someone for, let's say, an assault or a DUI or something else off campus, you need to be considering that behavior under behavior that would fit into sex-based harassment or sex discrimination under Title IX. You need to be disciplining for that too, but you can't discipline for it for anything except the Title IX process, which means you need to follow your Title IX grievance procedures. And then additional expansion would be obligations to address a sex-based hostile environment. under the education program or activity, even when some of the conduct occurs outside of the education program or activity or outside of the US. So the question is going to be, does the behavior outside of the education program or activity contribute to a sex-based hostile environment inside the program or activity? So it's not just where did it happen, but how does it impact the behavior on your campus? How does it impact the parties on your campus? And we can always go back to look at this fact-specific inquiry, hostile environment inquiry, to determine how that's impacting us. I'm pointing, as if you can see that I'm pointing to the second half of this page, so that fact-specific inquiry. So those actually are related and cross-referenced in the preamble as going together as well. All right, moving on to my next theme, training, and a lot more training. You got to do it. You got to plan for it. There are lots of people you got to train. Everybody needs to know what their responsibility is or isn't, right? So the ones, and we're going to separate different employees into different sections as to what their responsibilities are. More to come. We're going to help you on all of that. But what I need you to know is everybody's going to have some type of training to understand what their role actually is and what it's not. And then you need to make sure that your team is trained. So that includes your designees, who need to be trained as coordinators if they're serving as your designees, and new supportive measures administrators, so that new position completely needs to be trained. So in addition to everybody we're already training, we got to train them. They have to be trained upon hiring. So that's something that they need to do in that employee orientation. We're going to have to take it on, make sure it happens, done. That's okay, but turnover happens. So I want you to think about who's coming in the door when they're coming in the door, making sure that they're getting that training upon hire, and then also annually. So upon hire and then annually moving forward. Publish it everywhere. So you've heard me say 1,000,000 times, if you've trained with me ever, put your coordinator on a billboard. One of you will do it. It will be awesome. But the regulations actually help in my argument about this, that you all need to be seen on billboards, but really also just your information needs to be out there everywhere. Your discrimination statement or non-discrimination statement needs to be out there, as well as your policy, your procedures, and your non-discrimination statement and policy need to be on your website, which I'm going to talk about, your handbook, your catalog, any announcement that's sent out. So not just emails, but announcements that are sent out, bulletins, application forms, all of that. So you need to make sure, I have some recommendations here, but that we have a really strong website. So the website needs to be golden. I actually had an appointment to talk about one of the websites on the school I work with today, and I had to cancel it. One, so that I could be here with you, but two, so that we can actually prepare to really amp this up and make it as strong as it needs to be, including all of those things. And then I want you to also include a QR code. So on things that you're sending out to people, there's a QR code. Almost everyone has those smartphones now that can just click that and send them directly there. It will be helpful, and I think it will show good faith that you are trying to help individuals understand how to report or understand the sexual grievance processes. The grievance processes, or what sex-based harassment or sex discrimination are. I want you to make new friends, okay? This one makes us smile. Courtney and I both started singing our Girl Scout songs yesterday when we were going a dry run through of what we were going to talk about with you, but make new friends. Keep your old ones, but make new ones. I'm sorry, I'm really nerdy. But I want you to think about who your coordinator partnerships are. Admissions, human resources and employment, communications, your IT office, and then your disability services office. And I just want to say real quick right here that if a complainant or a respondent has a disability and they're registered with your disability services office, you can absolutely reach out to them and ask them how you can support the student through the grievance process, how you can speak to the student, how you can be most effective with the student, and what supportive measures might help. So this is a may. For our K-12 folks, it's actually a must. So they must meet with people when there's an IEP. But I want you to make sure that you are thinking about, how can we utilize this resource that we have? Because individuals with disabilities may need some additional supports or help through that challenging process. I haven't even gotten to the doors yet. So folks, hold on. We're going to be here a little bit after the 2 o'clock hour. I'm just telling you right now. 2 o'clock Eastern, that is. All right. So our grievance procedures for higher ed, this is challenging. What I want you to know on the front end is that you still may not discipline for sex discrimination outside of Title IX. You're going to have 2 process options for some of the sex discrimination. Okay, you're going to have 2 process options for some of it. It still has to be structured. Notice is required. So we still have those notice of allegations that are absolutely required. And a review is still required. So a review of evidence and understanding of the evidence that was collected, or a report, or perhaps both. All right. Door number 1, here we go. So we think in terms of like buckets, and we try to be creative and try to help you and actually help ourselves a lot of times think about these types of things. So you have 2 door options for procedures, okay? Door number 1 is for all employee on employee sex discrimination. It must, you can use it for all employee on employee. Hear me say employee on employee. That's important. Employee on employee. There's no student in there for that, for sex discrimination. And you can use door number 1 for sex-based harassment. So things that fit in the buckets. I'm sorry, for sex discrimination, that is not sex-based harassment. Sorry. So if it fits in the buckets, it can't be used here. Okay, for our students. Okay. It's going to get easier, I think. All right. Door number 2, sex-based harassment involving a student. If you ever have something that fits in the buckets and it involves a student, the student is either a respondent or the student is a complainant, you are using door number 2. You must use door number 2. Student in any capacity, sex-based harassment, door number 2. Okay, it is also the 0.46 grievance procedure. Door 1 is the 0.45. So if you're thinking about what that looks like, it's page 1540 in the unofficial version and page 1550. So that's where they start. If you want to go have a read, hopefully I can make it a little bit easier than what they do. So this is door number 1. Okay, door number 1, employee on employee or sex discrimination that is not sex-based harassment, aka it doesn't fit in a bucket. You have a complaint. You have a notice of allegations. They have an investigation with an opportunity to review the report or the evidence. Caveat: if you only allow them to review a report that's a summary, you must, hear me, you must also allow them to review the evidence if they ask. So my recommendation here is that we just share the evidence because they're going to ask. And if they don't ask, it's probably because they don't have an attorney. And that feels not great that we're only allowing it for the ones that have an attorney that asks, right? So we want to make sure that you understand you can share a report, you can share the evidence. If you choose to only share the report, they can ask for the evidence, in which case you have to provide it. There has to be the ability to question the parties and witnesses and assess credibility. So that's why it says the decision maker. Remembering decision maker and investigator could potentially be the same person. And this is not in a live hearing. This is all just via communications. There has to be a determination, and there has to be an appeal option that is the same as any comparable proceeding. So if it's a student case and it's sex discrimination that doesn't fit in sex-based harassment, you need to allow the same type of appeal that you would allow in any other type of student case. If it's an employee case, you need to allow the same type of appeal that you would allow in any other type of employee case, especially sex discrimination case. All right, so now we have door number 2 with no live hearing. And we're also going to have an option for door number 2 with a live hearing. So you are having to make a decision. Are we going to have a live hearing for things that fit in our buckets that involve a student, or are we not going to have a hearing? All right, and you're going to have to talk about what your state law requires as well. So state law and whatever circuit you're in for a federal law. All right, door number 2. You have a complaint. You have notice of allegations, which we have in everything, but you also have notice of meetings. Remember those pesky notice of meetings that are required in the 2020 regs? We also have to do those here. You have to allow for an advisor. It can be an attorney. You have an investigation. The investigation includes, as I said, the review of a report. If a report only, must allow for review of the evidence. Okay. Got it. That's kind of the same in this section. And then the next piece is questioning. So the questioning are presented by both parties to the investigator or decision maker. And there has to be a transcript. This is like kind of bananas. There has to be a transcript of the meeting so you can provide that to the other party so that they can ask follow-up questions. So we're recording our interview of our meeting. We're providing that transcript of the meeting to the other party so that they can ask follow-up questions. This actually becomes as complicated, if not more complicated, in my opinion, than actually having the dang hearing. But that's okay. That's just what we have. It's an option. You can always have the hearing in any of the situations if you choose to. This is what's required. We can always do more. Then we have a written determination and an appeal. We have the same 3 bases for appeal as we had under 2020. You can always add more. All right, door number 2 with a live hearing. So you choose door number 2 because you have to, or you choose to, and add some extra things in. And then you say, we're going to have a hearing. So we have complaint, we have notice of allegations. If it's yellow, it's the same. Those first 2 yellows, maybe not all. Investigation, it should be the same as well. So investigation looks very similar as it did to door number 2 without a hearing. Then we have a live hearing. This is very similar to what we had under 2020 regs. The questions are presented by parties to a decision maker to ask, or are asked by the advisors. We have a written determination. And then we have those 3 bases for appeal. So the difference between door number 2 with a live hearing and door number 2 with no live hearing really is the way that those questions are asked. Okay, are they asked kind of in writing? Are they asked via transcript and then follow-up writing? Or are they asked live and in a hearing? There is still an option for informal resolution. The notice is still required for the notice of allegations. And the coordinator has much more discretion to say, no, we don't want to. It's a very clear discretion. We don't want to use that. It doesn't fit, it doesn't make sense. And there's some factors to consider about that discretion. And then the informal resolution facilitator cannot be the investigator. I want to tell you, finish strong, finish strong, finish strong. Finish strong in what you have for 2020 regs. Until August 1st, we're under these 2020 regs. Don't give up on those right now and start focusing everything here. If we're so future focused that we're not in the present, we're gonna have lots of issues come up right now. Okay, we're gonna miss a lot of things. We want to make sure we're taking care of our students, taking care of our employees as we move forward. And then we're going to shoulder the load for you. Sorry, I forgot to say that, but we'll shoulder the load. Be a community partner with us, connect with us, let us help you write your policies. We got you. That's where I'm spending my next couple of weeks, is policy drafting. And obviously there are litigation challenges. I haven't seen one yet, but I anticipate today or Monday. Like, surely they're coming, right? These litigation challenges are absolutely coming. All right, I have a funny slide for you, and I've gone over, so I might as well just tell it to you anyway. So I have spent 1 full week without sleep and a whole lot of time in these regulations. And so what I want you to know is that in these regulations, the department appreciates is said 166 times. The department declines is said 286 times. The department acknowledges. If you got acknowledged, whoo, I'm proud of you. The department acknowledges 273 times. So these are the things that they're responding to, right? Like who's provided questions or comments to those NPRM. They said the department agrees 178 times. The department continues 42 times. And there were 2 people, y'all, 2 people got thanked by the Department of Education in these regulations. If that is you, if that was your question or your comment, we want to know who you are because we are so proud of you. You got thanked, my friends. It makes me really happy. Actually, I just am really nerdy and had a lot of time spent in these regulations. So, Courtney, I'm going to leave it to you to finish us out.
Yes. Whew, I've been over here doing the Q&A that's coming in, and it's been a lot, and there have been some great questions. And let me just tell you, big disclaimer, we're 1 week in. We're answering questions the best we can with the information we have. The doors are hard. We're going to learn them. It's going to go well. It's going to be great. Everyone's going to figure this out. But we will be training on those like crazy in these training opportunities that we have. So we have, sorry, I was laughing at one of the comments. So we have higher ed in-person training, 2.5 days, come to our headquarters in our city. And we are going to be really, this is like our blown up version of training where we will hypo things like crazy, help you think through some of these big items to get you to implementation. The next level would be coming to an in-person boot camp at our training center here. Those are shorter, but hit all of the regulations requirements. And then the third would be to come to a virtual boot camp. Our first one is May 15th. That is 6 hours. It will get you in compliance for your team, not your employees, but your team training for the Title IX regulations. So those are some of those options. And then secondly, the easy button answer to get your Title IX team trained is to become a community partner. We have a lot of them in our chat bar right now. And get that required training on demand that you can assign out to any of these team members at any time, plus lots of other support. We have a community partner meeting on Tuesday. For example, we have discounts on services, we have newsletters, we have a listserv that I think will be really active in the coming weeks as everybody tries to figure this out. So we'd love to have you as a community partner. Betsy, this should say higher ed on it. We'll get that fixed before the slides go out, as well as that 0.6 door fixed. Thanks everybody. And then lastly, our quick guide is on the resources page. So icslawyer.com/resources is where we have a one-stop shop for everything that's going on with these new regulations, including a free quick guide checklist for all of you on the ground as you work through getting to implementation. So again, tons of questions came in. We answered them the best we can. We will distill them down and get them into the Google Drive link that you have access to with all the resources. So the recording, the Google Drive link that has the slides, will also have the Q&A will come to you about 24 hours after this webinar ends. We are not afraid to come out early out of the gate and just answer questions the best we can. You'll see I copied and pasted a lot from the preamble to answer your questions about which door, if it's a student and an employee, for example, questions about who is an employee, when do you have to be trained, by August 1st, after August 1st. So all that's in there, and we will be updating that. So just know we're only 7 days in, lots to learn, deep breath, vacation, staycation, gardening, whatever is going to help you get through this. Make new friends. And so appreciate you, Diane, for saying you've been in a lot of webinars and this was the best. We really appreciate that. We try to give you as much free information as we can. Betsy's cheering back there. You can't see her because she's not speaking, but we want to give you what we can. So all that to say, we're on this journey together. Please stay in touch. If you want that Cleary webinar link or the K-12 webinar, we'll get that to you from Amy Blankenship, our fearless events coordinator out there, helping with all the inquiries that are coming in real time. So thank you again. Thank you, Betsy. Gives me chills. I'm so proud of our team. We've got an amazing group over here at ICS. They're really, really special. If you are not doing work with us, we would love to support you through this. For those of you we supported through 2020, we look forward to supporting you again, Carmen, through 2024. That's one that I saw out there. And we'll be in touch. So thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic weekend. Try to enjoy yourself and take a little break. I know a lot of people spent last weekend reading the regulations. So hopefully this helped. And thank you for coming. All of your messages in the chat bar give me all the feels of why I started this company. And we love supporting all of you. So thank you. I'm letting the chat bar calm down a little bit, and then I will end our webinar, and we will see you all out there on this journey. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend, and we will get you those recordings. Bye, everybody. Thank you, Betsy.
Thank y'all.